This is Douglas Preston, and I'm here to talk to you about one of the most extraordinary discoveries ever made by Lidar in terms of archaeology. And that was the discovery of an ancient prehistoric city in Honduras in the mountains of Mosquitia. And it was actually the first a pure archaeological discovery made with Lidar. Now, up to this point, Lidar had been used to map known archaeological sites, but this was the first time it was used to actually look for something new. And it seems incredible to think that a lost city could still be discovered somewhere on the surface of the earth in the 21st century. But this is exactly what happened, and this is the story that I'm going to tell you. Chris Fisher, by the way, was the chief archaeologist on the mission, so at the end of this presentation, he will be available to answer questions. But the area in question is called La Mosquitia. It's a very large area of rainforest in eastern Honduras and also in Nicaragua, covering some 20 to 30,000 square miles. And portions of it remain completely unexplored, some of the last scientifically unexplored places on the surface of the earth. Now, the area we're talking about here is outlined in green. It's in eastern Honduras, and where the discovery was made is pretty much in the center of that area. Here is a Google Earth image of it. And you can see this is one of the largest untouched areas of rainforest in Central America. But you can already see from this how much has already is disappearing through deforestation and so forth. But the area where the lost city was found is in that red circle somewhere. Now this area is one of the most intense jungles, rainforests on Earth. Triple canopy rainforest, some of the thickest in the world, that lies on top of tremendously rugged mountains. Some of these mountains are up to a mile high. And in the interior of these mountains are valleys, which, as I said, have never been scientifically explored. Now, this is a 19th century map, which calls this area the Portal del Infierno, which in Spanish means the gates of hell. And this is, one of the reasons why it wasn't explored is because of this absolutely forbidding jungle. Now, Central America, in the 1840s, a young New Yorker named John Lloyd Stevens heard rumors of lost cities in Central America. And he managed to wangle a diplomatic appointment to the region. And he brought along with him a British artist named Frederick Catherwood. And he went in search of these rumored lost cities. And of course, he had local indigenous informants who told him where they were. This wasn't pure exploration. It was actually him being guided to these ruins by people who already knew where they were. But the first one he heard about was a gigantic lost city somewhere in Honduras, in the western part of Honduras. And after a tremendous struggle, he reached it. And this was actually the first thing he saw, and Frederick Catherwood, the artist, drew it. And he discovered the city of Copan. And it was an extraordinary moment, actually, in the history of American archaeology, because up to this point, archaeologists really didn't believe that there were great civilizations that it once existed in the New World. But John Lloyd Stevens' discoveries, he went on to discover many other great Mayan cities, showed the world, and Americans in particular, that the New World boasted extraordinary ruins and remains of civilizations that were equal to anything found in Egypt or in Europe. It was quite astonishing, and it was extremely exciting. And the book that John Lloyd Stevens wrote about his discoveries and his travels became the biggest selling nonfiction book in the 19th century in America. And it opened up a whole realm of exciting archaeological explorations in the Maya area, in particular in Honduras. However, Copan is located at the very southern end of the Maya realm, and the jungles and mountains eastward and southward of that were so forbidding that explorers in the 19th century simply didn't go there. And it wasn't really until the 20th century that American archaeologists and others started exploring this area. And this is the journal of William Duncan Strong, who was an archaeologist for the Bureau of American Ethnology, part of the Smithsonian Institution, a journal that he kept going into this region. He was one of the first archaeologists in this region, and it has drawings and discoveries and so forth. But one of the things that Strong heard about and recorded in his journal were rumors of a great lost city called Ciudad Blanca in Spanish, or the White City, or sometimes called the Lost City of the Monkey God. And there are all kinds of stories about it, that it was a city that existed kind of quasi-mythological. It's where the indigenous people went to retreat from the Spanish, and their gods still lived there, and anyone who found it would die of disease, and all these different stories. And he wrote about this in his journal, and he treated it as a legend. But the thing about Central American exploration was that a lot of these legends turned out to be true. And I mean, the legend of Copan itself turned out to be true when John Lloyd Stevens got there. And so a lot of archaeologists took these stories seriously, and a number of expeditions were launched. 4 of them by the Museum of the American Indian in New York, which is actually now part of the Smithsonian in Washington. And they sent 3 expeditions into the Mosquitia Mountains, up these jungle rivers. And all 3 came back with incredibly tantalizing stories of this lost city of the monkey god, or the White City, Ciudad Blanca. And finally, they sent a 4th expedition up there. This is the fellow who was in charge of it. His name was Theodore Mord. He was not an archaeologist. He was an adventurer, a really good talker, a slick guy, and actually a con man. And he managed to con the museum into supporting this expedition. And he went into the depths of Honduras in 1940, and he was gone for 5 months, and he came back out with a tremendous announcement that he shared with the world. City of Monkey God is believed located. This is the New York Times headline. And he reported that they'd found this extraordinary city with pyramids covered with jungle, and that the informants told them that there was this huge statue of a monkey god there and all the rest of it. Unbelievable story. And it got everyone very excited, and stimulated a number of expeditions that actually, one expedition after another, going into this incredibly forbidding area, one of the most forbidding on earth, looking for these lost cities. Now, a number of archaeologists also were exploring this area and began to find the remains of a very mysterious civilization. They were not Maya, but they were related to the Maya in some way. They're obvious had communication with the Maya, but they themselves were their own civilization. But because it was so difficult to explore in this area, the jungles were so thick, so hard to see anything, that very few discoveries were made. And the lost city of the monkey god was never relocated, because shortly after Mord found it, World War II intervened, and then Mord committed suicide before telling anyone its location. However, when I was writing my book, The Lost City of the Monkey God, his journals, which were in the possession of his nephew, surfaced, and I managed to get my hands on them. And I discovered, I won't go into this in too much detail, but I discovered that Mord was a complete con man. He wasn't looking for the lost city of the monkey god. He found absolutely nothing in Honduras. All the artifacts he brought out that he claimed to have found in the city of the monkey god, he purchased or dug up on the coast. And this page reveals the con. He was looking for something else, something even more valuable than a lost city, and he found it. You'll have to read my book to find out what that is, because it's a whole side story to this one. But anyway, so all these tales about lost cities and the White City, the lost city of the monkey god, stimulated a lot of adventurers and other people, archaeologists, to look for this. And in the mid-90s, a fellow named Steve Elkins, who had a BA in archaeology, but also was a filmmaker, decided that wouldn't it be great to mount an expedition into Honduras to find the lost city and film the discovery. And he went to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena and enlisted NASA in a survey, a radar and spectroscopic survey from satellite of certain regions in Honduras. And the people at the JPL said they thought they found something of unnatural curvilinear and rectilinear dimensions in a valley, unexplored valley in Honduras that they called T1 or Target 1. I'm going to show you a video produced by the New Yorker magazine that shows the expedition that was finally launched in 2012 to do a LIDAR survey of this valley, because the jungle is so thick that these spectroscopic and radar surveys just could not reveal what was under the jungle canopy. But finally, Steve Elkins and his group, which the archaeologist would eventually be Chris Fisher, finally raised $1 million and were able to do a LIDAR survey of the valley, and they made incredible discoveries. So this little video kind of shows, it was produced by the New Yorker because I wrote a story about it for the New Yorker, but it kind of gives a précis of what was found. It's kind of fun. It's only a few minutes.
Oh, and Miles is going to go a little right through the gap. Look at that. There it is. A lost civilization.
That is the valley of T1 that JPL initially identified in 1995. It was finally LIDAR'd in 2012. And you can see it's absolutely untouched, unspoiled, uninhabited rainforest.
We're going to use this point, we've already marked it as our base location. You can roam 10, 15 meters from here, probe out, but I don't want you to go any more than that. If at any point you think, oh, bugger, where are they? Get on the whistle.
There's Chris Fisher, chief archaeologist.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Just walk back.
Probably gonna go over this and then into the next one, right? Yeah. Well, let's not mess around. Let's just go. I know where we're at. Let's go up. Let's go up on top of this one and work our way back down that way.
The inscriptions right here.
There are?
Yes. On the edge,
Oh
there are
my God.
decorations anyway.
Wow, wow. Look at the one that I
Oh, my goodness,
the
look
place
at
where they
that.
have a bunch of metates at school.
What?
I saw lots of kids. Whoa, everybody stop. Back up. Don't touch anything. Don't clear anything, please.
Looks like the ears are more of a jaguar. What could I think of it? Oh, you think so?
We're celebrating tonight.
Now we're talking.
Okay, so that gives you a sense of the actual moment of discovery of this lost city. Now, you know, was it the Ciudad Blanca, the lost city of the monkey god? Not really. It was the largest ruin discovered created by this civilization in Honduras. It covered over a square kilometer, but it was the largest of a number of settlements. I mean, what we really found in this expedition wasn't so much a lost city as a lost civilization. So this is the Cessna 337 that was brought down from the National Center for Airborne Laser Mapping at the University of Houston, and packed into this plane was a LIDAR machine. This is 2012. The plane had to be guarded 24/7 by Honduran soldiers because it was valuable and the machine was valuable. And that was one of the requirements that the expedition had to guard this machine. There's also some very sensitive military technology at the time inside the LIDAR machine that was not really allowed to be let leave the country without a special permit or waiver. So I actually had a chance to ride in the plane for one of the Lidar sessions. There's no seat. I was jammed in the back. It was very uncomfortable, 7 hours flying back and forth in a lawnmower pattern. On the right is the Lidar engineer from NENCOM, Juan Carlos, and the pilot who was flying the plane. And he's got his laptop computer on top of the Lidar machine. And you can see the plane flies in a sort of a lawnmower type pattern over the valley. Now the entire valley, over 20 square miles, was Lidar'd in 3 days, which is extraordinary because if you're trying to go anywhere on the ground in this valley, you can only go about 3 to 4 miles a day. It is so dense and so tough and also so dangerous. There's so many poisonous snakes. We'll get to that later. So 3 days, we were able to Lidar the entire valley of T1, this valley that for 20 years, 20 years ago, JPL had identified this as having unnatural features in it. And again, because we had filmmakers with us, we got every moment of discovery. Here is the moment when the Lidar images the data had been uploaded to Houston, had been processed by computer, downloaded back to us in Honduras. By the way, this was a joint Honduran-American expedition, and we had both Hondurans and Americans working on it. This was the moment of discovery. You didn't have to be an archaeologist to see the archaeological features. I'm just going to show you here an animation of the Lidar of one of the ruins that we found. Each one of those pixels is a reflection of the Lidar beam. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you already know how Lidar operates, so I'm not going to go into the technical details. But with the power of computers, you can manipulate the data in the point cloud, every little tiny reflection. You can rotate it, you can lift, you can separate it. And this is really a phenomenal little animation. This is the point cloud being rotated. The trees are obviously on top, the ground is below, trees are being lifted off. And you can see one of the plazas that we discovered in the lost city being rotated and now coming back down again. The resolution was about 1 meter. Because of the density of the jungle, normally it would have been about 1 centimeter, but because the vast majority of Lidar beams were reflected by the leaves, only a certain small percentage reached the ground and came back up, so that the resolution was affected by that. Now here is the Lidar of the valley with the trees in place. Here we are removing the trees, and here are all the archaeological features. Actually, many, many more than that you can see in just this image. And this is what we saw. It was a grayscale, the first image, but it was phenomenal. This was, as I said before, this was the first time that an actual archaeological discovery had been made, a new one made with Lidar. And it was also the first time that anything had been found that was like this in Central America using Lidar, because almost all the discoveries of lost cities and ancient cities in Central America were not really discoveries. They were indigenous people showed the archaeologists where they were. And often an archaeologist would go into a bar and talk to a bunch of people and hear the rumors, and then someone would take them to the ruin. In this case, this valley was not inhabited by human beings. There was no sign of human life in this valley, at least for 500 years, or certainly for centuries. And so this was really an unusual discovery in that regard. And here's a map that our archaeologist Chris Fisher made of the ruins up and down the valley. You can see inserted into this on the top are the largest ruins known in Honduras by this civilization up to that time. And you can see how much bigger the ruin we discovered was. And here is the central part of the ruin. There's an earthen pyramid there. There's a plaza. There's terracing. And where it says cache is where that cache of objects, sacred objects, were discovered that you saw the video of earlier in this presentation. So in 2012, we found the city by air. But in archaeology, nothing is really found for sure until it's been ground truthed. So we then launched a joint Honduran-American expedition to ground truth these ruins. We really didn't know what we were going to find on the ground. Now, this is me. I was covering this as a journalist for the National Geographic. I previously did a story for the New Yorker about the Lidar discovery. And to my left is Dave Yoder, who is the National Geographic photographer. And we've got a Honduran Air Force helicopter in the background that we were working with. And also we brought down our own helicopter. And as I mentioned, our chief archaeologist in this effort was Chris Fisher. And he had, and we had an anthropologist, we had an ethnobotanist, we had 9 PhD scientists on this expedition to really do a very thorough exploration. It was too hard to get in there on the ground, so we flew in by helicopter. This is the valley. It is an extraordinary geological setup. It's like a lost world. It's actually, I don't know what the geology of it is. I'm not sure if the geologists know it, but it's a giant valley ringed by extremely steep, inaccessible mountains with only one point of entry, which is there's 3 streams that originate in the valley and flow through a notch. And that's the only point of entry. And inside the valley, it's a fairly gentle terrain. And it's almost a perfect setup for a naturally fortified environment for a civilization or a city. And you can see it's just unbroken jungle. Very difficult to figure out where to land, but using our LiDAR scan, we had areas where they were quite open along the stream, and we were able to find one, and we landed. This is a picture I took after my helicopter landed. These two guys here running to the helicopter were British special SAS forces guys who were the sort of logistics crew of the expedition. Their goal was to get us in there and out to explore the lost city without being killed. And here's our helicopter. You can see it's a very tight area where the helicopter landed. And this was a stream flowing through the valley. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was beautiful. And when we arrived, it was extraordinary. The animals had never seen people before. I mean, I'd never, it's like a Garden of Eden. It's like, you know, those brochures that they give you, the Jehovah's Witnesses, that show people and animals living together. You know, animals were wandering around our camp. They're unafraid. They were, you know, all kinds of animals and birds. And later a biological survey team went in there and you know, they had mountain lions and jaguars and just coming up and looking at them and, you know, thinking about them, food or not food, that sort of thing. But it was really beautiful. And then we were accompanied by Honduras Special Forces soldiers, who just love to have their photographs taken with their guns. And they were very helpful to us. There was really no need for this protection because, well, you know, thankfully we never had needed it, but it was good to have them around. I think they were kind of keeping an eye on us too, to make sure we did what we said we were going to do. And we also had a chief archaeologist from Honduras, and other, and later some scientific team came in from Honduras and so forth. So I'll just show you a few images of what our camp looked like. It was raw jungle. We had to machete out our own little sleeping areas. This is my tent. I had a little hammock up there too. It just poured rain all the time, and we were in mud all the time. And there were insects like you wouldn't believe, chiggers. Every night I would get into my sleeping bag and have to pick the chiggers off my body. And I had they're really hard. You couldn't crush them between your fingers. So I had a book. I'd actually brought John Lloyd Stevens' book, and I had a knife point. I'd put the chigger on the book and stab it with a knife and kill them that way. And I finally had to throw away the book at the end of the expedition. There were so many holes in it. So this was our little, cooking area, kitchen. They had to saw through that log in order to, because that was too big to step over. But it was absolutely gorgeous, unspoiled jungle. When we first got there, there were the spider monkeys in the trees above my tent, and they saw me there, and they were furious at my presence. And they came down to a lower branch, and they were shaking branches at me and screeching and making all kinds of noise, trying to drive me away. They seemed to recognize that I was a fellow primate. And when I didn't leave, and Steve Elkins was near me and Chris was in the campsite right next to me, when we didn't leave, they all settled down on the branch and they were eating flowers that they'd picked off a tree, and they just watched us for hours, fascinated. And I suddenly thought, I wonder who's in the zoo here. Is it me? You know, they thought I was really interesting. They couldn't get enough of watching me walk around. Well, I just show you this to give a flavor for what it was like. This was a very important path, cleared in the jungle to a very important place. I guess you can guess what that was for. It eventually filled up with water as so much rain. But on the first night, I was walking back from my tent, and I saw this gigantic snake coiled up under Juan Carlos's tent, sleeping, not his tent, but his hammock, giant fer-de-lance. And so Woody, this is Woody, the logistics expert of the expedition, came over and he said, "Oh, blimey, I'm going to move him. Keep your lights on him." So the five of us, there were only very few members of the expedition had arrived at this point. We all stood there just transfixed while he cut a snake stick that was 7 or more feet long, and he pinned the snake with it. Up to that point, I'd been frozen in striking position, very much aroused, looking at us. I'd walked by it twice. By the way, the fer-de-lance is the most poisonous snake in the Americas. It causes more deaths than any other poisonous snake. It's many, many times more poisonous than a rattlesnake. But anyway, when he pinned it, the snake just exploded in a fury of thrashing about, biting. I mean, venom was streaming from its fangs as it just struck everywhere. And it was pretty clearly not going to be moved. So with extraordinary coolness, Woody managed to work the snake's fork stick up behind its head, grabbed it behind its head, and then it was swiveling its head around and expelling venom all over the back of his hand. I could see his skin bubbling. And he wrestled the snake to the ground. And by the way, it was much fatter and much longer than this. This is after the blood was drained. But anyway, wrestled it to the ground, pinned it with his knees, and cut its head off with his knife. Well, the snake continued to fight. The headless snake continued to fight, and the head continued to snap and spew venom until he stabbed it through the head and pinned it to the ground with his knife. I know that's pretty strong stuff. But, you know, I said to Woody, you better, and then Woody washed his hands very carefully, and he said, "Nothing like that to concentrate the mind, is there?" So we, very British. Anyway, so he was very concerned about the snake, because he said, where there's one fer-de-lance, there are many. And this jungle was so thick you couldn't see them. And he really wanted to put the fear of God into everybody. So instead of burying the snake, he tied the snake's head up on a tree so that everyone could see it. Because he said, I want people to be frightened. I want them to be scared, because that's how they're going to survive. Those fangs, by the way, were more than an inch long. And we ran into fer-de-lances every single day that we were there. No one was bitten, thank God. Including the area where we found that cache, there was a fer-de-lance under a rotten log that scared the hell out of the archaeologists and prevented them from working there for a couple of days. So we flew in all kinds of equipment, high-tech equipment. This was a very well-organized professional expedition that was really aimed to do a whole lot in a very little amount of time. This is one of our expedition members who kept a log for the expedition, Tom Weinberg. And now we're going to explore the lost city, and all of you are going to be very disappointed. Okay, this is looking across the river at where the city is, and you can start to see where the jungle just mounts up. So we set off to explore it at the earliest opportunity. Actually, walking in the river was really the easiest way to go. Well, that's me and Chris Fisher. This was actually a couple of days later after we explored the city, but it just shows you the rivers are kind of the highways of the jungle. And it's really the easiest way to walk, and it's the safest because even though there are poisonous snakes in the river, there are a lot fewer and you can see them. Can't see them in the jungle. So crossing the river, here's Woody clearing the jungle. It was absolutely mind-boggling. This mud was thigh deep. You can see Chris there in the background, up to his thighs in this mud. Our anthropologist almost got sucked under. Her snake gaiters filled with mud, and she literally was going down. She had to be pulled out. It's just like something you'd see in a bad film. So Chris had the Lidar images on his Trimble GPS here, and so he knew where everything was. He said, okay, this is the pyramid. And we look and there's nothing there. I mean, the jungle was astonishingly thick. This right here is the center of the lost city. This is the main plaza of the lost city. And you can't see more than 10 feet. Here's Chris again in the main plaza of the city. He's looking off to the right at the pyramid. This is actually the pyramid itself. That's Steve Elkins climbing the side of the pyramid. You can see how steep it is, but you couldn't see it until you were like 5-10 feet from it. And you only saw that the ground sloped up. And when you were at the top of the pyramid, there were still trees towering 100 feet above your head. So it's very well hidden. So we really almost immediately started finding things deeply buried in the jungle. We found this row of altar stones, just the tops of which were peeking above. And then at the base of the pyramid, on the second day, we found this cache of metates, which are not really metates. They're actually stone thrones believed to have be related to shamanism, and all kinds of stone jars with animal motifs carved in them and so forth. It ended up being over 500 stone objects left at the base of this pyramid, ritually broken, probably when the city was abandoned. And this is just as we started to clear. The Fer-de-Lance lived right under that log you can see in the background, and he was on the other side of it. That's why we haven't cleared that. And this was the first thing we saw was this jaguar head attached to a metate, and this is what it looked like after it was excavated. It's actually a weird jaguar. It's a depiction, part human, part jaguar, of a human who has assumed the form of a jaguar to absorb and transmit some of its power. And it was probably a shaman who sat on this throne and took hallucinogenic drugs to tap into the power of the animal. Then in 2016, we came back to start excavating. We didn't excavate on that first expedition. This was the first meter square that was opened up. You can see the density of the objects in there. There's Chris in the excavation. It was something like 500 objects were found in something like 200 square feet. These very unusual jars. This one in the foreground, we still don't know what it means. The archaeologist jokingly called it the alien baby, but it could be a monkey, it could be a body, a captive tied up for sacrifice, or it could be a body ready to be prepared for burial. My book, The Lost City of the Monkey God, talks a lot about what these objects represented, what they think they meant, what they were doing in this place, why they were broken, and what caused the city to be abandoned. So this was very big news in Honduras. The president of Honduras himself, Juan Orlando Hernandez, came to the site, and this is Chris Fisher giving the president a pair of snake gaiters to go into the jungle, because we certainly didn't want to be responsible for having the president of Honduras get bitten by a fer-de-lance. So we just that little 200 square foot area was excavated, and the artifacts were brought back by the Honduran Air Force and put on display at the presidential palace, and then some were displayed at the American Embassy in Tegucigalpa, and now they're all been moved. Most of them have been moved to the National Museum in Tegucigalpa. And this was a very important, expedition to Hondurans, because Hondurans are a people who have two origins: one from Europe, the Spanish, and one that's indigenous, mestizo people. and their European history is very well known. But the indigenous part of their history, aside from the Maya, is almost unknown. And this culture that still does not have a name, this prehistoric culture that lived in Mosquitia, it really captivated the Honduran imagination and was really a link from them to their past. It was very important to them and really almost to the world to start filling in the details of the indigenous history of the Americas among these cultures like this one that have been so overshadowed by the Maya, which have taken so much attention away that they remain very unknown and unexplored. And yet they were just as sophisticated as the Maya. They built in wood and probably fabric and earth instead of stone. So their magnificent cities have disappeared, even though at the time they were probably just as magnificent, colorful, and extraordinary as the Mayan cities. So here are some of the artifacts recovered from that cache of objects. These are vultures. Vultures had a great importance, sacred importance to this culture, probably because they not only did they eat the dead, so they symbolized death, but then they rose high, so high in the sky that they disappeared. So they, to the Maya anyway, they were a link between the earthly plane and the spiritual plane, and probably to these people as well. These symbols, we do not know what they mean. They kind of resemble Mayan sky glyphs, but they still don't know what they mean. Here's that jar that's so bizarre with that bizarre figure on it. And this was in the center of the cache of sacred objects. It's a weir vulture. It's a shaman who's taken the form of a vulture, again, as a way to communicate probably between the earthly plane and the spiritual plane. And this was a big deal in Honduras. They even put that jaguar head on a stamp, a photograph taken by Dave Yoder from National Geographic. So much of this area remains unexplored. This is a whole area of the valley that was taken, photographs taken by helicopter. This remains unexplored, untouched and unexplored. Here is a Lidar image of a ruin. The grayscale is on the left. That's been sort of enhanced on the right. Again, an entire mountaintop plaza, completely unexplored as of yet. The expedition has only touched upon a very small percentage of exploring this city. And the Hondurans intend to leave 99% of it untouched and unexcavated. And one of the great outcomes of this expedition was that the Honduran government really cracked down on deforestation that was eating into the edges of this area, and it halted it. And it's really, this has been an extraordinarily important thing, almost more important than the ruins themselves. Unfortunately, I'll never forget, this is another story I'm not really going to go into. I'll just tell it briefly, but I remember we all came out of the jungle and Steve Elkins was there and Chris were wiping our brow thinking, thank God nobody was killed. Nobody died of disease or anything. Well, that was a little premature. 2/3 of the expedition came down with a very horrific and incurable tropical disease called mucocutaneous leishmaniasis. We were all treated here, all the Americans anyway, were treated at the National Institutes of Health, which is run in the infectious disease department, run by Dr. Fauci. In fact, I had a chance to interview him for my book, and he warned about pandemics. And the book was published 3 years before the COVID pandemic. It's quite an amazing warning that he gave us, and I put in my book. So we got treated here, and it's a very interesting disease. You can read all about it. I do not advise you to Google and look at pictures of people with leishmaniasis. It's not pretty. So then the following year, because of the extraordinarily unspoiled nature of the jungle, Conservation International sent a rapid assessment team in there by a helicopter to look at the ecology of this area. And what they found was absolutely astonishing. It was unspoiled. They found species they thought were extinct living in great abundance. They found new species. They found a beautifully healthy ecology, pre-human ecology. And of course, one of the biologists, the chief biologist, had this encounter with a mountain lion where he went out at night to photograph glass frogs. And this mountain lion came out of the jungle, called a puma down there, and crouched 5 feet from him, looking at him and staring at him. And he said, I could see going through his mind, food or not food. And finally he decided not food and walked off. And then of course he rushed back to camp and was shaking. But anyway, they set up motion detecting cameras and left them up for a couple of weeks and then collected the film. I just want to show you a couple of these films. They're kind of cool. Okay, these are white-lipped peccaries, a very rare animal in South America and Central America now because they've been hunted out, but in extreme abundance in this area, hundreds of them. And stalking them, this jaguar. Very healthy ecology, huge, all kinds of big cats. Every big cat that ever existed in Central America was in this area in abundance. And one of the biologists down there saw but was not able to photograph what may be a new species of mammal. Here it is, he drew it. Anyway, it is could be a new species. That would be something unusual. So that is the story of the discovery of this lost city using LIDAR. And this is just the beginning. I mean, as you're, this 2-day event is really about the power of LIDAR. It is the greatest advance in archaeology since carbon-14 dating, as Chris Fisher, I think, has said. To LIDAR, the surface of the Earth right now is of absolute importance. It's a snapshot of the Earth with centimeter resolution, and it will be useful for centuries to come to tell us, it isn't just archaeology, but, first of all, to show deforestation, to show the melting of the glaciers, to show sea level rise, to show development, but also to document every archaeological site on the surface of the Earth for future generations before they're destroyed, and they are being destroyed. So I just want to thank you very much for attending my talk. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations.